Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. My name is Jim Byron, and I'm the President and CEO of the Richard Nixon Foundation, and I want to welcome you to the Nixon National Cancer Conference. As you know, this is our fourth Nixon National Cancer Conference. In 1971, when President Nixon signed the National Cancer Act, he said, quote, "I hope that in the years ahead, we look back on this day and this action as being the most significant action taken during this administration." The conference was conceived with this charge in mind: to convene global leaders in cancer research, innovation, education, and care, to deliver honest assessments of current benchmarks, catalyze future goals, and be a source of inspiration to patients, to doctors, and to those who support them. At the first Nixon National Cancer Conference in 2021, celebrating the 50th anniversary of the signing, we looked at the amazing scientific and technological progress that was in large part generated by the National Cancer Act, and how that evolution of knowledge transformed our ability to understand and deal with cancer. In the second and third conferences, we looked at the improved outcomes that we are now able to deliver to patients and where the future might possibly lead. This year's conference is taking a slightly different angle in dealing with the vital importance of how we communicate about cancer. Doctor to doctor, doctors to patient, to people, and to the public. Our first panel this morning will set the scene. Today, there are innovative and sophisticated therapies to treat cancer, far more so than when the National Cancer Act was signed 54 years ago, and even more so than 10 years ago. But that means that cancer care more broadly is extraordinarily more complex. Patients don't always understand the options available to them. And so this dynamic is a challenging one that can be very complicated for doctors to explain. So we'll begin this morning with both sides of that issue: the complexity of establishing an understanding of options for treatment, and then the complexity of understanding those options from the patient's perspective. But before I welcome up the first presentation, I'd like to take a moment to thank our conference sponsors: City of Hope, UCI Health Chow Family Comprehensive Cancer Center, Kaiser Permanente, Marlene Malik, the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center, and Chalk Hyundai Cancer Institute. Thank you all for your incredible support. This first panel will be led by Dr. Peter Pisters, who is a member of the Nixon National Cancer Conference Steering Committee. He is the president of the University of Texas MD Anderson Cancer Center in Houston, and he enjoys an unbroken streak of participation in our conferences for a fourth year running. Over to you, Dr. Pisters, to introduce your panel.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's great to be with all of you in person, to see the room filled, and to know that there are many people who are joining us online. We have a fantastic panel, and in a moment I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. As we think about the topic and how important it is, we recognize that cancer treatment, for a variety of reasons, has become more and more complex. That has to do with the way that systems are organized, the way that care is delivered, and of course the pace of innovation in a field that hopes to cure cancer within our lifetimes. We have to think about this from the perspectives of patients, the individuals that we serve, and as we do so, we recognize that at this moment in time, especially in Los Angeles, the city is going through tremendous challenges right now with the fires that are here. I know that there are many people here from this region. I just want you to know that throughout the rest of the country, we're thinking about the impact that this has on individuals, on families, on communities going forward, and it's something that we should really think about as we kick off this session. I imagine that other individuals on the panel will have a few comments to make about that, because I see it as incredibly important for our country, for Los Angeles, for California, and for the individuals who were impacted by it. Let me now move and ask the panelists to introduce themselves. We'll go through that with roughly a 60-second introduction from each one of you. And then we'll open it up, I think, with Ellen really talking about things from a patient's perspective. So, Ellen, do you want to start? And we'll go right down the row.
Thank you all for coming. And last night, if you missed it,
Might need this, Ellen.
I I'm sorry. If you missed Monica and Andy, it was extraordinary. So thank you for all you're doing. I'm Ellen Sigal, Chair of Forensic Cancer Research and founder. It was started 27 years ago when my sister died of breast cancer at age 40. Our work is really about innovation and regulatory change. So we work very closely with the FDA and the government to really look at advances that are ready for regulatory approval, but we do it through consensus and working with everyone and thinking only of the patient, and they're always at the table. And I headed public-private partnerships for the NIH, now governance, but more later.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Ann Barker. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer for the Ellison Medical Institute down in Santa Monica, and I'm also formerly the Principal Deputy Director of the National Cancer Institute, and I'm currently also a Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Arizona State University in Complex Adaptive Systems. That's a lot of titles. But mostly I'm about making cancer history, a famous quote from Peter's institution. My interest is in understanding a lot more about cancer so that we can control a lot more cancer and ultimately cure a lot more cancer. And so I've been privileged to actually lead a lot of projects when I was at NCI, like the Cancer Genome Atlas and others. It's telling us a lot more about how complex this disease is. And it seems the more we know, sometimes the harder it is to think about how we deliver that to patients and how we use that information. And I think that's what we want to talk a little bit about today. I think it's a 3 or 4-pronged problem, and I hope we can hit each of those and talk a little bit more about the role of patients in this whole process. So thank you very much, and thanks to the folks who organized this meeting. I think it's a great meeting.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Rick Van Etten. I'm the director of the Chow Family Comprehensive Cancer Center at UCI and UCI Health. I'm a professor of medicine and biological chemistry, and I also serve as Associate Vice Chancellor and Senior Associate Dean for Cancer at our institution. I'm thrilled to be participating this morning and looking forward to the discussion. I want to second what Dr. Pisters said about the impact of the fires that we've had up in LA. They haven't, as you know, directly affected us here in Orange County, but they have in the past. And we've been in active discussions with our academic cancer center colleagues, including our colleagues at City of Hope, about how to best deal with them and their patients if the need arises. So again, welcome, and I'm looking forward to our conversation this morning.
Let me just immediately say thank you, Rick. So my name is Marcel Brink. I'm the president of the National Medical Center for the City of Hope. I'm also, for the whole national network of the City of Hope, the chief physician executive. Clinically, I am trained and still a little bit active as a transplanter. I also have a lab that is devoted to cancer immunotherapy and microbiome. I'm, of course, still very active at the moment with running a command center since the fires are still burning, and we still have some of our network sites that are impacted by what is going on. So I will only stay for this forum, and then unfortunately I have to go back. But I just want to echo, Rick, what you and other centers have done to be there when we needed you. It was fantastic.
Well, thank you to our panelists. Let's get started. An excellent jumping off point is from the patient's perspective. Ellen, I know many people in the room read your blog, and I know that you've got a unique perspective as a supporter of cancer research and now as a patient. So maybe you can share some of the perspectives that you have in that context.
I'm the accidental tourist in cancer. So my sister died when she was 40, leaving a 4-year-old child. That's when I started Friends, and obviously in depth our work is to really make sure patients get the best treatments and innovation continues. But recently, 5-6 months ago, I had a I've always had GI issues, and I had a CT scan, and it showed a kidney tumor and then an MRI. And navigating the system for me, who has access to everyone and is somewhat expert in the science was absolutely unbearable. I couldn't figure out exactly. I was told there are different ways of treating my cancer. I could have watch it because it was a small tumor, or I could do ablation, which they basically microwave or remove it. But no one told me about the pathology, and I had to basically ask the centers to look at the pathology, to do a biopsy, because the pathology determines how aggressive the cancer is. And then finally, I had my surgery at NIH. We did an ablation. But what this taught me was how complicated it is for any patient to go for a second opinion, to understand the opinions that are being given, to ask the right questions. As an example, when I was given options, no one knew the pathology that I had. And then finally, to help me guide me through it, Georgetown didn't speak to Hopkins, and Hopkins didn't speak to Georgetown, and Hopkins and Georgetown didn't speak to the NIH. And it was impossible to get my records transferred. So even with something easy, it was very complicated. And I thought, how can I, who has access to everyone, have such a hard time? What happens to people in a community that don't have the ability to ask for a biopsy or to understand what getting a second opinion means at a cancer center where there is really expertise? So it was kind of, it brought home to me the complexity, even with the spectacular science that we have, how difficult it is for an individual patient to navigate and to get the help they need and to ask questions. So I'm thrilled to be with these people that are making, everyone on this panel is expert. But when you're in a community and you're alone, and you have a diagnosis, it's very, very hard to navigate. And many patients are terrified to ask for a second opinion or to ask things that they don't know about, and they're getting information off the internet or blogs that are not accurate. So how we get information and the right information and access to a patient is a very high priority of mine and the work we're doing.
Ellen, I mean, that just crystallizes the problem. I mean, we're looking at somebody who has extraordinary health literacy, has a vast network, has a personal cancer, and has so many challenges navigating systems of care and getting high-profile organizations to work together in a way that benefits your health care. And if you can't do it, you can imagine the challenge for individuals who don't have the same level of health literacy, do not have the same networks, cannot access the same elite organizations.
There's even one other thing. Thank you, Peter. When I had my biopsy on my health, the results were given on my health, and I'm highly sophisticated with the genetics of the disease because we work on it, and I didn't understand one thing. And I had to immediately go to the NIH and said, what do I have? So the idea that, and then it took 2 or 3 days before the hospitals called me and explained, and I had pathology that I didn't know whether it was aggressive, whether it was mild, whether I was going to die in 15 minutes or live 20 years. It was just extraordinary to get this without an explanation.
Well, there's a lot for us to unpack here. An excellent jumping off point, I think, would be the complexity of cancer care in addition to the way in which care delivery is organized, which certainly you're pointing out, Ellen. And I think a lot of that is driven by the fact that if you look at cardiovascular disease and cancer, they're both major health issues. Cardiovascular disease, to a large extent, is a single organ disease defined by a single process. Inflammation in the coronary artery. Cancer is all over the body and genomically defined. As a consequence of that, FDA approvals for cardiovascular disease last year were 3%, for oncology over 30%. This creates a challenge for community oncologists. I think as the panel knows, and probably all of you saw, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal on the front page in the fall last year talking about the fact that oncologists that are in general practice cannot keep up. And in an era where there's democratization of knowledge, the gap between specialists at places like the NIH or Johns Hopkins or City of Hope has widened. And this is a fundamental problem that we have to solve going forward. So let me start with you, Anna, and we'll go down the line about how do we solve for that problem? And is it a situation that you think is like primary care medicine, where primary care physicians to a large extent are navigators to specialists?
Well, okay. So I have the same, Ellen and I share a lot of things in our lives, but we also share the fact we both lost our sister to breast cancer. And I lost my sister in 1994, but I've lost really all of my family members to cancer. We were a cancer family, and I have to say, I can, as caregiver, I'm not a member of a patient yet, hopefully never, but it's exactly the same story. And I don't actually think it varies, even if you are an oncologist. Andy and I were at the NCI, for example. A lot of people would come to us who were very senior professionals. So this is complex. And patients actually have taken this up in the last few decades to try to make it easier for patients to understand, to navigate these systems, and we pay for this now in the government, probably at the institutes, et cetera. But even that, it's only working to a degree. So why is this happening? I mean, I think we have to step back from this and ask ourselves, what is it that's gone on? In 1994, my sister she died of her breast cancer. Nothing much was available then except cytotoxics. And if you go back to the discussion we heard over dinner last night with Andy and Monica, I look back, and if my sister had lived another 3 years, there would have been a whole series of things available to her that were not available then. And that's happened over these decades. So your providers now have, when they look at a patient now, they have to think about all the drugs that are available and how those drugs can be used and should be used. How can they be combined? Should they be combined? You're carrying around about 30 trillion cells, and each of those cells contains DNA, 2 copies actually of the genome, and something can go wrong all the time in the genes. And some of you are unlucky enough to inherit some of those genes. The germline is inherited genes. Most of us, all of us, will have changes to our genome as we go along in life, some more than others. And when you start thinking about this, when we set up a project at NCI called the Cancer Genome Atlas, when Andy and I first went to NCI with Francis Collins, our intent was to sequence the cancer genes so that the oncologists would have a handle on this to know, how many genes were actually changed meaningfully. So we did that. We originally started out to do 20 cancers. We ended up doing 33 when the project was over. So we have a pretty good handle, not perfect, but we have a pretty good handle on which genes are actually now modified or altered, or there's all kinds of ways those genes can change, by the way. So we started out to target these in the early 2000s, and we felt like at that time we could target them very specifically. And that has evolved over these last couple of decades, and we can now target a lot of them very specifically, to the point where we now have biomarkers that can identify not just that you have breast cancer, or that you have prostate cancer, or you have pancreas cancer, but we can tell you what subtype of cancer you have. So now the physician is looking at you in a system that's broken, I should say. Now you have payers, electronic medical records, none of these things are connected. And we have a broken healthcare system. We have an extraordinarily complex set of possibilities now in oncology, driven mostly by advanced technologies, and that's getting bigger and better. And just around the edge now, we see artificial intelligence creeping into this conversation. and you're going to hear more about that later today. But that's beginning to change things as well. So, and I'm hoping it will change things for the better. And I think it will help us to pull a lot of this data together. And the one other thing I'll add is Peter, we don't have particularly good data in oncology. It's unfortunate but true. Most of our data sets are not that great. And a lot of that was not given early on to the value of a patient's sample and how careful we should be in collecting those samples. And every patient today should have their genome sequenced. Maybe not all the genes, maybe not a whole genome sequence, but certainly those coding genes we should be sequencing. And if your genes aren't sequenced and you are still dealing with physicians who aren't doing that, and that's true by and large in the community hospitals. And so we have to change this. We have to deliver this to the patients who need this level of care. And precision oncology was the dream that both Dr. Schembeck and I had when we went to NCI. And we tried to build that tier of support for that, and it's pretty far along now. So I think the future looks a lot better than it does right now in terms of how artificial intelligence could pull these things together and help us all get better care. But for the immediate, I would, you're asking me a very hard question, how would I solve this entire puzzle? I think I'd turn to patients to do that. I mean, I think real-world evidence and the way patients are learning or could learn from Ellen's experience and these other experiences, I think there's a ton of data there that we could use to start to make this, the life of our oncologists, easier. And I had a patient say to me once, you think cancer's complex. My life is complex. And so we don't think about that much, how complex. I'll just close with one thought. I have a program that I do with the American Association for Cancer Research each year called the Scientist Survivor Program. We've had it in place since 1998, I think. And one of the patients said to me, I'd like to show you a slide at the last meeting we had. She's a lung cancer survivor, quite a prominent one. And lung cancer has probably changed more than any other disease in the last 5 years than any cancer we've had to deal with. And she showed me the slide of, this is a patient's experience. There were 492 entries on the slide, or 450, I've forgotten. And it's all the points that a patient has to deal with and the care that they get from the time they're diagnosed. I wish I could show it to you because it is the most interesting slide I've ever seen. But right at the bottom, it says, patients' lives are also complex. And it has all the things that they have to do every day and to cope with their cancer. So I'd start, and I'd place a lot more emphasis than we do currently on real-world evidence from patients.
That's helpful. As we think about the problem, you've really outlined the complexity of cancer care very well. I'm really interested in drilling down on the role of the community oncologist and how they can keep up. Richard?
I think it belongs over here.
Yeah.
Well, I'll take a crack at it. First of all, I think we are concerned about making sure patients have all the information they need, because I think the clinicians in the audience would agree that a well-informed patient is our best ally and best partner in cancer care. But I would second Ellen's recommendation that I think the single most important thing, at least in the beginning, is for a patient to seek a second opinion at an academic affiliated cancer center. Doesn't have to be NCI, could be, but I think academic centers are very good at this. To be able to access that, expert level of care and information that they can get. And it's not necessarily to be treated there, but to develop a treatment plan that takes into account what academic cancer centers can offer, including access to tertiary quaternary care, to advanced diagnostics, access to clinical trials if needed, and sophisticated therapies like the latest immune therapies, transplant if it's needed. Here in Southern California, we have an embarrassment of riches. We have 5 NCI cancer centers in Southern California, and there's other academic centers that are very good as well. But there are areas of the country where patients have to travel hundreds of miles to get this, and I know that it's been an emphasis of Dr. Bertagnoli when she was at NCI, and now Kim Rathmel, to try to get the distance that patients travel in the United States to access that kind of care, to try to reduce that. So I think that's an important thing for the future. I would say in terms of communicating to patients, I think there are a couple of low-hanging pieces of fruit that we can exploit, and we're trying to do that, for example, at UCI. One is that we actually have patients now get, and I think this is true at most institutions, when I as a clinician have an encounter and I write a clinical note, that actually goes up to the patient portal. They can read exactly what it is I've written. I think that's a good thing, but it also puts a special burden on me when I'm writing that note to make sure that it's congruent with what I've told the patient, and that it's in terms that they can at least begin to understand when they read that note. The second thing that we're piloting at UCI is a system where we have active listening within the clinic room, and we actually generate a waveform transcript of that, and that can be provided to the patient, so they no longer necessarily have to scribble notes during the encounter. They can sit back and they can listen, and they can review the details of the encounter at a future time. So I think these are all important tools that we can use to improve the communication between our patients with the goal of improving their treatment.
Marcel?
Yeah, so I think that you're absolutely hitting on the most critical issue. Most of the patients are not being treated at a cancer center or any kind of a specialized center, treated locally by a community doctor. If I think about my own training when I started, all that we have was radiation oncology, surgery, and a few chemo drugs. Now there is so much more. I don't envy community doctors at the moment trying to figure that out. How can we help them? At City of Hope, we thought about a few things. The first thing is, and I don't think that many people really realize that, we have these two campuses, but actually we see as many patients in 35 community practices. And those are community doctors that are linked to us, and we help them to have access to all of the knowledge that they need to give optimal care. We want to make sure that the outcomes there are exactly the same, so we measure that closely, because we want to make sure wherever you enter the City of Hope system, that outcomes and care is exactly the same. We measure that, and we're very proud to say that we have the same outcomes. But okay, that is only what we can do with our network. We are also going national, because we feel that we have to have a larger footprint to bring more of our care to patients who need it. But still, you need to do more, because as I mentioned already, most of the patients are not coming to a cancer center. Things that we have been thinking about is Access Hope, which is a program where companies can sign up. About 7 million patients have now access to that. It's both for doctors and for patients. And what it does is provide a second opinion virtually. Even then, okay, that's only 7 million. So what else can we do? I think it goes back to policies, and one of the things that has been done here in this state, City of Hope and others have really fought for that, is the California Cancer Care Equity Act, which makes it possible for medical patients to be seen at an academic center. And I think it's these kind of things that have the greatest impact, right? Because these are tools that will help patients directly and to help community doctors. And we have to keep on building on those things. Virtual access to tumor boards, making it easier for patients to navigate, giving them access through a policy to all the right doctors, because otherwise we're going to get stuck. And we might have fantastic care that is not reaching most of the patients, which is what we're seeing at the moment.
Go ahead, Ellen.
I want to make a brief comment. I think we all agree with what is being said here. The complexity is the community doctor, number one, has to agree that there can be or should be a second opinion. The complexity of getting that second opinion for the community doctor or the patient is almost impossible to navigate. So if you want to get into one of these wonderful centers where you're going to have expert care, it is very hard unless you know the system, know the people, or someone is advocating for you. So there has to be a way, if the community doctor is willing and the patient knows they want another opinion, how they can access the system without knowing 15 people on the board or people that are practicing there, because most people do not have the ability to get that much needed second opinion.
I think that part of the challenge is that in the community setting, most community oncologists are practicing what I would call guideline-based care. They're going online. They may not have seen this condition for a few months, and that's like light speed at the pace at which discovery is occurring. They're figuring out what NCCN guidelines say they should do. And then if the patient is expressing a desire to go to a specialty center, they're trying to figure out how to navigate that. Oftentimes, when the patient gets to the specialty center, you're experiencing out-of-guideline-based care because they're super specialists, they have a clinical trial, or they have new insights that are not reflected in the guidelines, which by definition are about 2 years old. 2 years old is ancient right now in oncology care delivery. And so the challenge is that there's a gap that is widening that's based on the pace of innovation and discovery that guidelines cannot keep up with. So I'm sure, Marcel, you see this all the time when you give an opinion and the patient says to you, that's not what my doctor said at home.
Yeah, and that is why I think it's incredibly important that when you give these second opinions, that you also give the community doctors access. Because otherwise you set up sort of a conflict of a patient who has to go back, well, that doctor said that it should be different. So I think trying to reach both patient and the doctor is the most effective.
I'm just interested in whether there are other ways that we could use AI or better communication to try to narrow the gap that I think we all agree is widening, not closing right now. Do you have any thoughts about how that can be done, Anna?
Yeah, so Sean was on a meeting with me not long ago where we discussed this issue a lot, and at a previous meeting as well. So this is very early days. I mean, everybody probably has something on their screen now that allows them to use ChatGPT, right? Everybody's using it to write something. For my birthday, someone sent me a poem that they had written on ChatGPT, so I thought that was pretty good. They just took my CV and put it in. It was really quite interesting. If you take a CV and put it in ChatGPT, you'll get back a poem. So save on Christmas cards, too, as well. So, but I think one thing to think about is what I just said about the genomics of cancer and omics in general. Not just what happens in the DNA, but what happens after that. In the RNA, we learned enormously during COVID that this is a very valuable approach to target cancer as well. And now with proteins, that's where the work gets done. You're really a whole collection of micro machines that's working every day. So there's opportunity here because this is digital information, and that is incredibly powerful in AI. And so I work in complex systems because you're also a set of complex systems, and so these systems all talk to each other. The GLP-1s that everybody's using for obesity and losing weight, it turns out that they work for everything. I mean, you know, we just got it approved for sleep apnea, and so there are going to be other drugs like that. And we're going to find those drugs probably prospectively and design them early, I'm guessing, in as little as a decade, maybe less. And so I think AI could organize this in ways that it would be obvious to the clinician. When they walk in the door, they have, you know, these biomarkers, and this is available, and now it's a matter of, I think, what the options are. So I think this could be transformative. I really do. I think once we learn how to use it and how you learn how to apply it especially, then everybody could be empowered in the community. They could have access to the same sets of, you know, genomics and all that's going on in that space, and also what's really best for this patient. And so and patients get this now, by the way. The lung cancer patients that I mentioned, there's a subtype of lung cancer where ROS1, a gene that's mutated in that particular disease, that particular group has organized. They're the ROS1 group. And so, you know, people are getting this, they're understanding, and I suspect they're asking harder and harder questions of their oncologists because they go in with this information. So, you know, I think the future looks really good here, but I think the issue is getting it to the people who need it most. And I don't know what the statistic is anymore, but 80% of our patients are treated in community centers. And increasingly, our cancer centers have relationships in networks that actually have that outreach. So I could see our cancer centers becoming hubs for the kind of information that we have to distribute, and so that everybody has access. So I think AI could make a huge difference in oncology. I'm really enthusiastic. And I wasn't 5 years ago, so I've changed.
Well, we hope so. I think part of the challenge, and we can go to these gentlemen for thoughts in just a second, is that technology has advanced massively in the sense that the cost of sequencing and the accuracy and the computational capabilities of sequencing is improved dramatically. There's high-speed internet that's more ubiquitous in society than it ever has been before. There's democratization of knowledge in a variety of different ways. There are preprints that appear online for community oncologists to get the latest insights. Despite that, despite all the technology, the gap is widening, not closing. That's the problem that we need to be thinking about. And community oncologists who go to ASCA have to examine the opportunity cost. I can go to the colon cancer session, but I'm going to miss the breast cancer session. That's the challenge that they have right now. And they know that the pace of discovery in these fields is taking off. Look at lung cancer. Back to you.
So that's the biggest issue. And I had a colleague years ago that said, advanced technologies unevenly distributed always widens the gap. And, I think this is where the government could do a lot more. I mean, I being in the government for a while, I can tell you it is a place where you can impact communities, not just local communities. And so I think there's every opportunity to have systems where we begin to pay our cancer centers, for example, more money to actually start to institute examples of what I just said. Can you have these databases and can you have them broadly available? I mean, it would mean changing, some of our directions, for example, in NCI and NIH, but, we haven't functionalized probably 2% of the genome in terms of knowing we have about 700 genes that have been associated with cancer, and frankly, every gene that's ever been discovered has been associated in some way with cancer. So we haven't functionalized 2% of those. So, knowing what those genes do, we still are in the dark. We should have created a large network to do that, but we didn't. Because there's always this yin and yang between funding individual investigators versus funding big science. So I think NCI and NIH have to do more big science at this stage to actually put some of these larger issues on the front page. I mean, whether it's functionalizing genomes and getting that information out, or setting up networks that actually, even within the cancer centers, you could have specialists who you could call on. And cancer centers should work together to actually share information, and they do that more and more. But the cancer centers are going to be key to getting anything into the communities, I think. And I think that we could do a lot more.
Well, I would say two things. One, referring back to what Marcel said about virtual second opinions, I think that's a really powerful tool. And we want to make sure that we're not limited by the government restrictions around that, who you can actually offer an appointment to. Like, for instance, we are only allowed to do that within the state of California right now. I don't think that is reasonable. We should be allowed to extend that across the country. We have a consortium at the University of California, which involves the five of us that all have NCI cancer centers. It's us, UCLA, UC San Diego, UC Davis in Sacramento, and UCSF. And we have a mechanism for virtual second opinions within that network, probably similar to what City of Hope has. That's, I think, one thing I would say. With regard to AI, and I know we're going to hear more about AI later, I just want to inject what I think is a note of caution. I think AI is going to prove to be really good at generating lists in the differential diagnosis space, lists of possible diagnoses. In the treatment space, lists of possible treatments. But in the current state, I don't think it's going to be optimal for actually making a diagnosis or suggesting the optimal treatment. And there's two reasons for that. One is that what it's basically doing is scraping all the published literature. And it is a fact that probably somewhere between 20 and 30% of published studies are not correct. They're in error.
80%.
Okay, I yield to Anne. And AI right now doesn't know how to tell the difference. Seasoned clinicians and researchers know this, but AI probably doesn't. The second thing is that in theory, science is self-correcting, so if something is published, it should be reproducible. If it's not reproducible, we should know about it. But it's very difficult to publish negative studies, and there are many pharmaceutical industry studies that were negative that never saw the light of day. That makes it basically difficult for AI to basically sort out those possibilities. So while I think the future is bright for AI, I think it needs to be, the output from AI needs to be interpreted very, very carefully.
Marcel?
Yeah, so I think that Rick hit on all of the things that I wanted to mention also. There is still the aspect of garbage in, garbage out. And it is obvious that if there's a lag time, as you pointed out already, Peter, and sort of an unfiltered access to all kinds of data that is coming from everywhere, where it's not really balanced what the validity is, that is dangerous. I think where AI can at the moment help us is with synthesizing clinical data. So we are doing that now. Also at the moment, that if you have a complex patient who has been seen at multiple centers, multiple treatments, to get a good summary of what has been done, that's where AI is really, really helpful. It can help you with documenting what is happening when you're meeting a patient, documenting for your notes, etc. I would still be cautious to really put AI out there as the major tool that is going to tell us diagnosis plus a treatment plan. I would still like to see that we have somebody supervising that. So that is why I think there is a lot of value in second opinion and other virtual tools, as I mentioned already, to help patients and doctors elsewhere.
Ellen, you were going to add something?
Yeah, I just want to say that Monica brought this up last night about trust in science. We're facing a huge dilemma because there's so much information and so much of it is bad. And the patients and people who are reading it can't distinguish. And because of some of these people that like to go on TV and talk and frankly don't know what they're saying, are leading people to really very bad decisions. And what you pick up on the internet can be accurate and it can be inaccurate. So we have to figure out how to deal with that. Rob Califf, the current head of the FDA for another week, has tried to really deal with misinformation. I know Monica has, and it's very difficult because they're not getting it from NBC News at night, and they're not getting it from the Times or the Wall Street Journal, and they're getting information that is grossly inaccurate. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, this is an unbelievable opportunity when we look at AI, and an incredible risk. And that's something that I think all of us recognize because we're so close to what's happening that we don't necessarily realize that probably what's happening to society is on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. And no one knows what the final state is going to be. We're all so close to it. We're experiencing it live in real time. And we're dealing with a generation of a younger workforce that will never know work without AI. Whereas most of us are learning how to integrate AI with work. So it's really going to be interesting to see what happens, and it's happening at a pace that none of us really have seen before. We had about 10 years of, hey Siri, what's the score in the Cowboys game? Alexa, turn the lights off. And it was pretty static for a long period of time until it took off. I heard a talk from Sam Altman not so long ago, about a year ago, and he said AGI, artificial general intelligence, was thousands of days away. I took that to mean 3 to 5 years, the way I interpreted what he said. I heard him on a podcast about 3 weeks ago, and he said AGI 2025. That's this year. That's the end point where there are networks of computers as smart as us. The endpoint after that is ASI, artificial superintelligence, when you have networks of computers that are smarter than human beings. At that moment in time, as a leader of a research institution, you won't need Nobel laureates on your faculty. You'll get experimental results and you feed them into ASI and say, what is the next experiment? Please design that. And you'll get better experimental design by definition than you can by having smart people on your faculty. So this is going to happen really, really fast.
Exactly. I was going to say exactly that. And I think, you need to either be on board and actually understanding, or you're going to be an observer. And I think, I think our community especially is going to have to think about training in terms of at all levels, especially in the medical schools today. And they're going to be entirely, I think they're going to be trained differently. I think they're going to understand differently, and I think they will do differently. But getting back to Ellen's point, about the lack of really great data, I would agree with that 100% but I think you'll hear from Sean and others today that AI is getting good enough, already, to design that next experiment. You still got to have context. And I think what we're missing in oncology is people like these sitting with people who are actually designing these algorithms to give context to ask the right questions. And, how we do that, I think the smart people, like the people sitting up here who take care of patients and really need this, are going to have to subject themselves to a lot more training and a lot more, conversations with people who, take an AI expert to lunch kind of thing. So, I think we're at that era where we can make it better, and I think we should, because I think patients will benefit.
Well, I think we know there's going to be another session on AI, and I'm sure they're going to dig in a lot deeper than we are right now, but one conclusion that we probably can reach is that AI is here to decomplexify life. It will probably find a way to decomplexify oncology care delivery in ways that maybe we don't understand today over time. I think it's fair to say that patients and doctors will be using it more and more than they are even today. It's going to be interesting to see. On the topic of screening, there's another avenue that's opening up. I'd be interested in your thoughts, Marcel. Maybe we can start from you and work this way. As we look at cell-free DNA,
can I just say one more thing about AI? Because I think where it can definitely help us, and we're seeing that already. Let me give you the example. When I used to go in New York to my primary care doctor, I felt I was sitting there helping her to fill out a note about who I am and what is going on with me. She didn't even look at me. She was looking at her screen, because that's how doctors have to function at the moment. AI can really make it possible, right? These kind of programs, DEX, etc., that you can actually make eye contact with your patient, that you can focus on care, that you don't have to spend all of your time documenting things. So I think these are the positive aspects that we can see immediately in the near future coming out of AI, that we can get back to more of the care and less of the documentation and algorithms and billing and whatever, because a lot of these kind of things can be done for us. That is where I see really very positive aspects coming at us in the next years. So just wanted to add that.
No, I agree on that point. I think one of the topics that we could talk about maybe next year is the workforce shortage that's coming, where the United States will be short 50,000 physicians. Some people say it's 80,000 physicians by 2035. What that will do, I predict, will be nurse practitioners and PAs will have a bigger role, and they'll be supervised by AI. And probably care will actually be better than it is today, where they're not supervised optimally over time. And physicians in certain specialties will be disintermediated by AI platforms. And I think you can see that happening already in a variety of different ways.
What we have been measuring, and that is being measured at every center, is what they call a PJ time. And what that means is documenting how much time our doctors and our nurses spend documenting patient records, etc., after hours. And we see that a lot of them are doing that after they put the kids to bed at 9, 10 p.m., Saturdays and Sundays, they come back to their office to do all of that. Those kind of things hopefully will benefit from AI, helping them with documentation. Sorry.
Well, we have about 10 minutes left, so I want to open it up to the audience. And Monica, it's great to have you here. Maybe we can give you the privilege of the podium and the microphone for your comments and thoughts on this.
Well, so first of all, thank you so much. As I'm listening to all of these, I just want to start with a general comment. And it harkens back to the Cancer Act and the founding of the cancer centers. And oh my God, what a deal for the American people. What a deal. You know, we put in, let's be honest, a tiny fraction from government, a tiny fraction of what it takes to deliver the extra innovation, the extra incentive. What do we get for that? You know, in terms of these core grants, what do we get for that? We get a community that's all working together to solve problems together. We get a culture of innovation and caring for people with, you know, responding to resources. We get a community that is incentivized to write grants and get them funded. Let's put it right there. That being something we're very grateful for. And believe me, as the pay line goes down and down, one of my biggest worries is people are just going to give up. Nobody's going to want to write those grants. We get in a community that puts in the sweat equity to do that. We increasingly now, with the embracing the fact that cancer centers serve their catchment areas, we get an incentive that we're certainly not paying for, that you reach out to underserved communities. And, you know, we formed this nidus where the dollars that NIH puts in are leveraged incredibly by the hard work and culture and commitment of cancer centers. So, you know, I listen to these discussions and I think, God, you know, what money have we put in and what return on investment are we getting from our cancer centers? It's truly remarkable. So first of all, I just want to acknowledge that. And boy, the wisdom of the National Cancer Act to create this thing. And then last thing I want to say is, boy, do we take it for granted. You know, do we sit back and think? And the reason I do that is think back. If we were sitting today and think of everything you do in response to this core federal funding, and if we were sitting today and we were asking a company to do that for us, can you imagine what the bill would be? So let me just stop there and say thank you, and to acknowledge just how little we invest for how incredibly much we receive.
We have time for just a couple of questions. If you have one, please raise your hand. We got one over here on my right.
Can I hold the mic? Oh, you hold it. Okay, great. I'm being helped already. Maggie Senthil, UCI. I'm a surgical oncologist. Really enjoyed the panel and the topics that are being discussed. One of the questions that I have is typically academic health systems are now branching out into the community one way or the other, and we have all of these community practices. And we heard from all of you that there is tremendous amount of knowledge. I mean, the fields are evolving at neck-breaking pace. So what do you envision in terms of how would this information be provided, the knowledge, actual knowledge transferred to the community practicing physicians? The second part of the question is that with all this evolution, do you expect the community practices also becoming very specialized, disease-specific, instead of having a very general focus? Would love to hear your thoughts.
Marcel, do you want to take
Yeah,
that
sure.
issue.
So that is something that we're working on now already, and I mentioned already that as the ultimate metrics, we're looking at outcomes, and we're good there. The ways that we're doing it is with tumor boards, clinical guidelines. We've set up, because you didn't touch on that, access to research. We set up a nationwide central trial office, which will make it easy to also get patients who are being seen in one of these network sites on our trials. So in every possible way, we try to set up guidelines, tumor boards, etc. Still, probably one of the most critical things is that you connect the doctors with your doctors, that they know each other. Because often the best thing is still a phone call. And if they know somebody who is highly specialized at the main campus, and there's no barrier for them to make that phone call, that's often still the best thing. But certainly we are working on all of the things that seem to be obvious. It seems to be working so far for us reasonably well with these 35 networks, and maybe something can be learned from that could be exported on a larger scale also. But those are some of the tools that we are using.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah, in the back of the room, guys. Sir, what is your question?
I'm Steve Cool. I'm actually asking on behalf of a caretaker. I'm actually the caretaker. My wife was recently diagnosed with stage 3 endometrial cancer and being cared for at City of Hope in Irvine. So my question is, it's been about 3 or 4 months that she's been going through it, gone through 3 chemotherapies, and recently question about insurance coverage has come up in terms of certain drug that she's allergic to, and now they're trying to figure out a way around it for her to complete her chemotherapy. And now insurance companies might be having issues with getting an alternative therapy that would help her get through it and, be done with this particular cancer. So my question is basically, how does insurance companies play into the role of complexity of cancer care today?
It's a great question. Marcel, maybe I can go back to you. The fundamental problem is
You don't want to tackle that, because I know that you have been looking at this question, and I've heard you speak about it. So.
It's an exceedingly complex issue. It has to do with the way that healthcare is reimbursed in America, and the fact that in many cases, insurance companies, which function as pass-through agents for employers, are functioning as gatekeepers and trying to control the cost of care through a variety of different mechanisms. This creates a tremendous challenge because all of us are subject to communications that come back with denial of our ability to provide services that are essential for patients. Some of those are justified, and these controls exist for valid reasons, but oftentimes they're not justified, and they're very frustrating on the provider side when people are holding back life-saving treatments, or when you have individuals on the other side, on the insurance side, that don't have the same qualifications as our experts.
They don't have the same qualifications, and they don't have the same incentive.
That's right.
And that makes it a very, very big problem, because they are really forced to make decisions without the knowledge, without the AI, without the expertise, particularly in rare disease. So you're running into very big problems, and we haven't really addressed that yet.
Separate topic for another session.
So I think the major avenue for your clinicians there would be what's called a peer-to-peer appeal, where the doctors there reach out directly to a physician who's overseeing the reimbursement strategy at the company, and very often that can be successful. So I'm sure that's underway.
One thing, Peter, you hear from every patient is they spend a good portion of their time when they're not in treatment just filling out forms.
That's right.
That's it. And and in conversations with insurance companies, it is a very big burden on every patient.
Well,
Let's give our panel a round of applause. Thank you. That concludes our first panel. Our second panel, Cancer, Medicine, and Artificial Intelligence, will begin after a short break at 1:45. Thank you. We'll see you shortly.